Hey, in some way, I'm always writing about Max, for he is my beloved, my everything. Not just my dog, but, my God, making me not merely his so-called owner, but his witness, his disciple, as well as his till death do us part protector. My next proper share on here with you, virtual friends, is going to be a piece that I'm currently writing about Max and our gloriously codependent relationship, inspired initially by a piece of stand-up comedy that I watched a few months ago by Atsuko Okatsuka, in which she talks at length about her beloved husband, Ryan, who is not a dog, although, there is something maybe a little bit golden retriever about Ryan, just as there is something a little bit Shiba Inu, I don't know, French bulldog about Atsuko, which makes the two of them even more adorable, in my eyes anyway, than any couple that I know of. So while I was working on this piece this morning, I suddenly remembered a podcast that I'd started a few years ago called Love the One You're With, which only made it to 4 episodes, of course, but was, cut, shall we say, from the same cloth as my current musings. So, in a bid not to repeat myself, I went back and listened to my 2023 thoughts before continuing to write. And then I thought, okay, well, let's maybe add that language to the jute sack, which is what this is. Wishing you well, friends, on this Saturday afternoon.
1, 2, 3, come on!
In the summer of 2019, Elizabeth Hode, a middle-aged woman from Ascot in Berkshire, married the love of her life, Logan, live on breakfast television in front of 1 million viewers. Elizabeth wore an elegant long-sleeved white wedding dress and a fascinator headband topped off with a prodigious white rose, more or less the size of her beloved's head. Logan was dressed for the occasion in a tuxedo and black top hat. Kamal Setonay, a former Love Island contestant and TV presenter, took the role of best man. Logan and Elizabeth's matrimonial vows were officiated over by the actress Alison Hammond, who read a series of tender but also somewhat Mickey-taking marital commitments that had presumably been scripted for her by the writers of Good Morning Britain. In 2019, the year in which Elizabeth and Logan got married, she was joined in this taking of her and Logan's marriage vows by 219,850 other couples, a decrease of 6.4% from the previous year. The 2019 figure was also the lowest number of marriages since 1893. So we could say that 2019 was not an especially good year for the institution of marriage, even though 213,122 opposite-sex couples decided to get hitched in the same year, as did 6,728 same-sex couples. But only one, Elizabeth and Logan. When I last checked Elizabeth Hode's Instagram account, it revealed that 4 years later, she and Logan are still happily married, of which I have no doubt. Of course, one can never trust anything that anyone puts out on social media, especially about their relationships, but I can assure you, even though I don't know Elizabeth and Logan personally, that the two of them are still very happily, I would even go so far as to say blissfully happily, married, which is to say together and satisfied with each other's togetherness to this very day. This is quite a feat considering the lackluster statistics for conjugal longevity between us human animals. Back in 1965, 1 in 10 couples ended up divorcing by their 10th anniversary. That figure is now at around 1 in 4 till death do us part connections failing. And in total, around 42% of marriages end in divorce. That figure goes up to around 92% when you consider non-marital romantic relationships held together by nothing more than a kind of quid pro quo exchange of sex, acts of service, and emotional labour, as well as copious usages of the L word. You know which L word I'm referring to here, right? Oh, I L you, and I L you even more. We're so in L, and of course we'll always be in L, because L is a beautiful thing, and L conquers all. As you're probably aware though, even if not necessarily framing it in this way, we're all L-ing each other like crazy, only to dissolve these linguistic and self-satisfied L bonds on a whim or a worry. Talk is cheap, even L talk, for all is fair in L and war, and L, as we all know, means never having to say you're sorry. I understand this from a somewhat personal angle, but also from the perspective of a therapist to the married and non-married alike, all of them L-ing the crap out of each other, whilst at the same time being in various shades of torment about their L relationships. But not Elizabeth and Logan. How, you might ask, could I be so self-righteously sure about them? Well, perhaps because I've got a pretty good sense by now as a middle-aged bod of how these human L pairings work, and also don't work, at least not without a heck of a lot of effort on both sides. And even then, look around you. There's a good deal of suffering with regard to relationships. If you're in a relationship with someone at the moment, even a relatively good relationship, would you go so far as to say that there's absolutely no sufferance of each other on a day-to-day basis, but just oodles and oodles of love and laughter, acceptance and commitment all the time? Or as Cilla Black might have put it, a Laura love, laughter, acceptance and commitment. I very much doubt that to be true. Want to know why most relationships fail? It's very simple, really. Not enough love of the unconditional variety, laughter, acceptance and commitment, but rather a good deal of contempt, criticism, defensiveness and stonewalling. The Gottmans, John and Julie, clinical psychologists and two of the most respected relationship researchers of the past 50 years, refer to these heartbreakers as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And trust me, friends, spend just a few hours working as a couples therapist and you will experience at first hand the hooves, the horns, and the stampeding of one human ego locked in its own perverse patterns with another. Endless and interminable he-saids and she-saids, the constant litany of unmet needs and vexatious lacerations to each other's ways of being. I don't need to confirm this for you. The L word, which is to say eros, that romance and sex and maybe even family building side of things, is quite often something of a shit show for us human animals. But not for Logan and Elizabeth. And why is that? 3 reasons. Reason number 1. Logan and Elizabeth don't communicate with each other through this weird symbolic system we call language, with its many misinterpretable pitfalls. They don't even text. They never speak on the phone, and yet somehow are able to understand each other perfectly well. They never feel rejected, sidelined, or misunderstood. In fact, their relationship is almost 100% easygoing and free of strife. Reason number 2 is that Logan and Elizabeth's needs are perfectly aligned, and both are quite happy to fulfill each other's needs and wants and requirements without complaint or extensive negotiation, facilitation, and analysis. And reason number 3 is that Elizabeth, as you may have realized by now, is what we might call a human animal. Well, that's what I would call her, whereas Logan is a non-human animal, which is to say, a tuxedo and top hat wearing golden retriever with a ready grin and a twinkle in his eye. I can imagine lots of people, especially single people who are betrothed in their own way, even if not explicitly or overtly so, to their non-human love objects, to use that psychoanalytic term, would have felt a certain sense of shame as well as resentment in how this alliance was being portrayed on television that morning in 2019. Something to laugh and sneer at, to look down on as being inferior in some way to their human-to-human connection. But if you are, and many of us are, truly in love with the non-human animal who lives and engages with us in an ongoing way, as opposed to the human animals we swap the L word with, you will probably recognize in Elizabeth and Logan's relationship something fundamentally true and pure and innocent, something much more aligned with the dictionary definition of love rather than any romantic use of that word. Here is the full OED definition. Quote, a feeling or disposition of deep affection or fondness for someone, typically arising from a recognition of attractive qualities, from natural affinity or from sympathy, and manifesting itself in concern for the other's welfare and pleasure in their presence. Great liking, strong emotional attachment, with, of, for, to, towards. And then in square brackets, to be distinguished from sexual love, the intense feeling of romantic attachment based on an attraction felt by one person for another, consisting of an intense liking and concern for the other, typically combined with sexual passion. End quote. That sounds about right to me, which is also why I now use the word love to describe my attachment to friends, family members, songs, books, and even TV programs. I really do love Natasha Lyonne's first series of Russian Doll, for example, even though that is not a word I'd use for season 2 of Russian Doll, but that's just me. I also use this word quite frequently with regard to my husband, if you want to call him that, or my partner, as I like to call him, my partner in crime and non-crime, this little guy called Max, also Maxie Jax, as well as numerous other terms of endearment. Max and I have been together for 7 years, half of his life, all going well, and a good chunk of mine. As I work from home and generally speaking socialize with him at my side, we are pretty much inseparable. And that's how we both like it. One hears, perhaps because it is rare, of couples who have been married for 50 years and due to the close bond forged in this period of time have begun to function as one entity rather than two separate souls. Quite often, the person who dies first in the couple will induce in some way the death of the other. I try not to think about Max's death. I cannot imagine what it would be like to not have him with me. I also know that when he dies, very few human animals will even be able to comprehend the depth of grief and loss I will most likely experience in losing him. We are, like other species, very much focused on our own kind, not just in privileging the human-to-human connection above that of the human-to-non-human, but also due to slaughtering so many non-human creatures without a second thought, the majority of us are frankly unable to value our non-human fellow beings in the same way that we do each other. I was discussing this with my father the other day, who was very clear on the matter. Yes, he'd be a tad dispirited when Max dies, as Max has become part of our family in some way. But Max is just a dog, Steve, he reminded me. The love we feel for dogs is different to what we have for other humans. At least, this is so for him. But for many of us, including Elizabeth Hode, maybe our true love, our soulmate and life partner, if you want to call them that, as it doesn't really matter what we call these souls, the souls we wake up next to each day, as I wake up next to Max, who we care for and feel gratitude and joy towards on a daily basis, maybe these souls like Maxi Jack's and others, are the real deal, the love we're all pining for, but never fully achieving with other members of our species in the ways that we might want or need. Last year, I was a pretty crap partner to Max. This was largely due to the fact that I spent the year, I would now say wasted the year, pining for a human love object who had removed themselves from my life. But as this new year dawned, and I recognized just how much time I had been spending waiting for this other person to contact me again, which they never did, or at least not in the way that I'd hoped for, I had a bit of an awakening, I guess, in that I realized that I had right there with me every minute of the day and in the darkest depths of the night, my beloved, my soulmate, my joy, the one that I had chosen to spend the rest of his life, and if I could only have it that way, my life, together with. The one creature in all the world who I feel at any and every moment completely and utterly seen and accepted by, unconditionally accepted, which creates, as you know, if you've ever experienced this form of acceptance, a kind of blissful harmony between the two souls who are able to bestow this beautiful gift on each other. How many human animals, though, do we truly feel in that way towards? Very, very few, and perhaps none of them. If we do find this person, which I thought I had found in the last person I fell in love with, we often want to marry them, or at least be with them until death do us part, as Elizabeth wants to do with Logan. I wanted to marry my last love object, and did indeed propose, as that is how I felt in their company, accepted, loved, understood, and appreciated. It seemed at the time, at least, like they felt that way in my company too. What more could a couple of human animals want or need from each other, right? They wanted more, and that's okay. All is fair in L and war. Deep relational reciprocity perhaps needs to be the key to any love connection, and this just wasn't the case. Non-reciprocity works for a time in our L-word relationships, but doesn't last. It's a transient thing, which is why so many of us break up with each other and choose never again to maintain any sort of connection with the people we once said were the L's of our lives. The L thing is a lovely thing to participate in at the time, but unlike love, that laughing, accepting, committed love of Elizabeth and Logan, or me and Max, or you and whoever you are loving with a capital L at the moment, it doesn't last. And when it goes, people get hurt, sometimes profoundly hurt, in a way that is hard to recover from. At some level, I think I've always made podcasts as a kind of love letter or future love letter for a human love object, or when I'm not in a relationship, for a potential human love object. A supremely narcissistic act I would now recognize and acknowledge. An attention-seeking, look at me, saying clever things in an interesting way, love me, love me, love me creation. But when we start to truly love, to love with a capital L the ones we're with, which perhaps also requires us to love ourselves a little bit more, including the self that was spurned or found wanting or lacking in some fundamental way by another, maybe even that other when we were child versions of ourselves, perhaps we can use whatever creativity we possess for less narcissistic and neurotic pursuits, for something truly love-focused, truly joyful and good. Something which makes us happy when we share it with the one we love, even if they don't ever listen to the thing we've made for them. For what is a prayer if not a communication of love and gratitude towards a being who doesn't speak our language? Perhaps we might even start making podcasts for those very creatures in our lives who don't care one iota how clever or funny or intelligent we are, who give and receive love to us, from us, simply because they can. For what else are we supposed to do as we all trundle towards death? What else, given the choice, other than to love, as cliched as that cliched Choose Love t-shirt slogan now reads? Maybe choosing love, the non-romantic love, as core to our lives, even though this goes against all our romantic narratives, entails very simply just loving the one you're with. Loving yourself, loving your dog or cat or other non-human animal partner, and treating them with the kindness, respect, and besotted, yes, besotted devotion that you would hopefully want to treat a husband or a wife, and also be treated by in a similar way in return. For me, this is the first podcast project that I've decided to make for those who can't and won't listen to it, although I also know that there are out there a handful of people who love Max almost as much as I do. Not that it's a competition or anything, and so they too might occasionally tune in. But if you don't know Max, I suspect a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in this podcast will fall on deaf ears, as indeed it should. I don't believe in an anthropomorphic God with a human temperament and human concerns, but if I did, I would like to believe that when Max dies and goes to doggy heaven, where miraculously everything is possible, including the ability to finally understand that stream of weird noises coming out of the mouths and speakers of us human animals, I'd like to think that Max will be listening to these words that I'm recording here, words that confirm what he already knows, which is that I love him. I love him more than I love life itself at times. Hey, Maxie Jax. Yes, I'm talking to you. So thank you, occasional human listener, for tuning in. But I suspect this podcast will probably bore you, as it's only really going to be about Max and how much I love him. Just like other people's dreams are fascinating to the dreamer and their therapist, but pretty dull to everyone else, so are other people's relationships with their dogs. I think that's how it should be. Certain things can only be known by the two souls experiencing those things together. So this podcast is to remind me and Max about those very things, and also to remind us to love and cherish each other as we both do every second of every day. Maxie Jax, this podcast, my love, is for you.
1, 2, 3, come on! If you're down and confused and you don't remember who you're talking to, concentration slips away, 'cause your baby is so far away. And there's a rose in a fisted glove when the eagle flies with the dove. And if you can't be with the one you love, honey, love the one you're with. Love the one you're with. Love the one you're with. Love the one you're with.
Don't be angry, don't be sad, don't sit crying for the good times we had. But there's a girl, she's sitting next to you, she's just waiting for something to do. There's a rose in a twisted glove, and the eagle flies with a dove. And if you can't be with the one you love, honey, love the one you're with. Love the one you're with. Love the one you're with. Love the one you're with.
Can you hear that? That is the sound of Max licking a pillow. My pillow, to be specific. Often, when I'm sitting in the sun, when there's sun to be had on this cloudy isle, I'll hear some tongue action starting up behind me, and generally speaking, I'm able to detect by now whether Max's tongue is being applied to his genitals or to my pillow. Sometimes he also licks random spots on the duvet or the bed sheets. I don't think this is connected to food. I wash my bedding once a week, and I don't consume food or drink there, so I've had to come up with a few other theories for why Max is such an avid pillow licker. My favourite one for now is that he is absorbing or taking in my dreams of the night before, whether or not I myself can remember having had them. Recently, I've been keeping a dream journal, which has in turn helped me to better recall my sleeping visions, or as Freud describes this time spent journeying inside the terrain of the unconscious, quote, "the liberation of spirit from the pressure of external nature, a detachment of the soul from the fetters of matter." The word dream comes from the Proto-Germanic draugmas, meaning deception, illusion, or phantasm, but also the Old Saxon drom, which refers to merriment or noise. In Old English, the word indicates joy or mirth, also music, which brings us closer to Shakespeare and his midsummer musings, such as, quote, "Are you sure that we are awake? It seems to me that yet we sleep, we dream." Or as Stan Laurel once put it, "I had a dream that I was awake, and then I woke up to find myself asleep." A very Enneagram 9 kind of dilemma, we might say, although it applies on an egoic level to all of us. I've sometimes thought that there might be a connection between the words dream and drama and trauma. In German, dream, as you may know, is rendered as Traum. But the etymologists tell me that this is just fanciful free association, as most things are, of course, in the realm of thought. I wish I could taste Max's dreams as he does mine. Occasionally, when we're lying in bed late at night and I'm reading, I hear his slightly snuffly micro-yelps and stirrings, and notice that when I look over, these are often accompanied by a small pantomime of paw perturbation. This is even more amusing when he's lying on his side or his back, and it appears like he's running or cycling in place, whilst at the same time absorbed or engrossed in his own inner narrative. I can sit and watch Max dreaming for as long as Max's dreams last. The embodied agitation of his dreams seems to me to always convey something of his inner world, the quiddity or quintessence of Max's consciousness, that commingling of absurdity, surprise and bewilderment, or maybe just his sense of being captured by something incredible, remarkable, noteworthy. Another reason why we human animals sometimes do take note of our inner visions when waking. Watching Max dream, whilst also knowing he will not be able to tell me of his dreams, only underlines one impossibly possible aspect of our communication. Only underlines just one of those impossibly possible aspects of how humans and non-humans communicate. Like everything else we aspire to capture, but especially when doing so for another, the experience flees as soon as we try to grasp it. We live as we dream, Joseph Conrad reminds us in his cheery novel Heart of Darkness, alone. Max and I, though, prefer that more conjugal quote from Winnie the Pooh. Quote, "We dream so we don't have to be apart for so long. If we're in each other's dreams," says Pooh to Piglet, "we can be together all the time." Max very rarely makes an entrance into my dreams, perhaps because he is always with me, and so to dream of Max would be to dream of myself. But I hope one day, when he is no longer with me, that I will be able to see and play with Max again, as I sometimes do with my ex-fiancée, the ghost I call Nadia, in my dreams. I ask Tassie, short for Anastasia, my vet, what's the deal with Max licking my pillows, and she somewhat punctures my dream theory, as vets and medics of all stripes are wont to do, by reminding me that dogs like salty snacks, just like us non-canine creatures. And for this reason, a recently slept-on pillow resembles to Max a kind of Bombay mix of dead skin cells, mouth goo, night sweats, all of which he finds highly appetizing. The other night, I had another dream about my ghost fiancé. I was staying at a kind of hotel or some kind of complex. At this hotel or resort, it was possible to have some therapy with one of their in-house counselors. I had chosen this hotel because I knew that Nadia was working there in this capacity. She had been given a different name, though, and I wasn't sure if this was just the policy of the hotel so as to protect the anonymity of their staff, in order that the therapy team wouldn't be contacted afterwards by a guest who had fallen in love with, one of their therapists, or was it for another reason? Clients often fall in love with their therapists. Nadia herself had fallen in love with her long-standing therapist Mirek and had hoped that I would be a bit like him, which it turned out I wasn't. Perhaps she herself had chosen her new name to disappear into. In my dream, the Nadia who worked as a therapist at this hotel was called Judith, as in Judith and Holofernes. Before our meeting, I felt extremely nervous, but also kind of excited. Then I remembered a part of the dream where somebody introduced me to her with the following words. "This is going to be your therapist, Steve, Judith. I believe you've booked to have a dinner session with her tomorrow night." Presumably, this hotel offered the option to have therapy whilst consuming food in their restaurant. Maybe this is even possible, I don't know. I can't remember the last time I stayed in an actual hotel. In the dream, Nadia / Judith played it super cool when we met, pretending that we were strangers, as I guess we now are, at least in her mind, and I did the same. She was wearing different clothes to how she would normally dress. She had on a kind of white shirt and some loose, slightly shiny magenta trousers. She seemed very professional and together, very much in command of herself and the situation at hand. I remember thinking when I first saw her in the distance getting out of her car in the hotel car park that she carried herself a little bit differently to when we had been together and betrothed to marry. She now moved in a much more breezy fashion. I imagine that this was probably due to her promotion at Sainsbury's, as well as having this other job at the hotel, this stream of well-paying clients. I also thought, which I found painful to consider, that her new assurance might also come from being in a really happy and well-established relationship as part of this sort of power couple that finally she had achieved via Hinge after sending me her Dear John email. I could tell that she wasn't pleased with the fact that I had inveigled myself somehow into having her as my therapist, but it looked like she was going to be a trooper about it and carry out the session, even through gritted teeth and dagger-stabbing eyes. I didn't see the session itself in the dream, but I remember a part of it where we were sitting down in a restaurant connected to the hotel, and a waitress brings over this 100-year-old bottle of wine. Presumably I had ordered a special bottle for our reunion, which the waitress carried over to our table and said something like, "Here is your 100-year-old bottle of Barolo." The bottle of wine was attached to a large printed card and wrapped in cellophane. It looked a bit cheap and tacky, and I wondered if this really was the real thing. But I guess I so wanted it to be the real thing, and I had paid for the, £100 bottle of this amazing Italian wine. So of course I nodded politely when asked if they might open it and pour some wine into our glasses to taste. I also remember myself in the dream wondering how I was going to bring up the subject of
us. I thought that maybe the best way to play it would be to present our situation or our past situation and my ongoing struggles with her fairly abrupt form of departure and subsequent stonewalling as if I wasn't really referring to the person sitting in front of me at all. I thought, well, I'll just use the new name that I've chosen for her. I'll just call her Nadia when talking about Judith, so as not to say her real name, so as not to say Judith's real name, so as not to say Nadia's real name, and then this will allow us to talk more freely. There was a part of me that knew this meeting was only going to make me suffer more, as even writing about it brings some suffering. And maybe this was because the dinner date session was set up for an early Friday evening, Nadia's preferred time for consuming food, no later than 8 p.m. And I knew full well that afterwards, after this very formal client therapy session, Nadia would most likely be going home to her husband, the man that she married after the ghosting incident with me. This thought pained me terribly, but I recognize that it was the only way I was ever going to speak to her again, so I had no choice but to go through with it. I also sensed that she herself would not particularly struggle to maintain the persona or facade of therapist throughout, and this would be extremely painful too. I knew that this would sort of be her way, in that very sort of passive-aggressive 9-wing-8 way of punishing me for putting her in this predicament. Her refusal to break role, to acknowledge that she had once been my fiancé and me hers, this would be her way of maintaining the upper hand, as she always had. But in order for this conversation to happen, I would need to play along with her 9-wing-8 game, as I always had. I imagined that in our dinner session, not a date, a therapy session, she would use all the right words, say all the right things that a therapist might say when someone is describing a relationship trauma to them, but that we would both know that her empathic statements were being uttered in a perfunctory and self-protective manner. Sort of like this. I see. How does that make you feel? That must have been difficult for you. A little bit like my training therapist, actually, Alban. That's how she spoke. I imagined that she would probably also dig a little bit deeper into my story, because she is undoubtedly convinced that she had, in fact, carried out sufficient aftercare in the wake of that email, which broke things off and asking that I post her stuff to her because she didn't really want to have the pain of the conversation that might follow from that email. I knew that she would be angry at me for implying that she hadn't done sufficient aftercare, not for herself and certainly not for me. I realized that I would, of course, be leaving the session with her assumption that I was just being a time-wasting histrionic drama queen, and that she had been perfectly in her right to cut off all ties when she did. Me trying to have a conversation with her by booking her in for a session as my therapist would only add weight to all of her shady and mistrustful notions about me. I was sure that she would also nudge me somehow to reveal that after a year of stonewalling, she had, in fact, finally sent me an email saying that she was ready for us to meet and have a discussion in order to give me the closure I had asked for, and that she would also like to see Max occasionally if I was up for that. She would get me to admit that I was the one in the end who couldn't go through with that meeting, couldn't face seeing the wedding ring on her finger. I knew that I would leave this meal in the same way that I had come to it. She would have the power in a 9-wing-8 sort of way over the discussion and the framing of our past relationship. She would be exquisitely in control, as she always was and always had been, and no doubt still is, and I would be left feeling diminished and foolish. And yet, something in me needed to see her and talk to her again, and so I knew that I was
I was definitely going to go through with this painful dinner therapy date session, even though it would hurt on an emotional level quite a bit. In Act 5, Scene 1 of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Theseus outlines, with some disdain, his concepts around imagination and fantasy. Quote, "Lovers and madmen have such seething brains," he relates to Hippolyta, "such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends." That apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends. According to Theseus, and I was sure that this would also be the case with my new therapist Judith, the dreams of spurned lovers are more strange than true. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet, he goes on to explain, are of imagination all compact. One sees more devils than vast hell can hold. That is the madman. The lover, all as frantic, sees Helen's beauty in a brow of Egypt. The poet's eye, in fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. Wonderful. And gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. Max's dreaming mind probably doesn't do this. Well, how would I know? Maybe it does. If I am ever in his dreams, I hope I am, but I have no way of truly knowing, Max doesn't necessarily, I would imagine, see a Steve there, because he doesn't see me as a Steve, right? So what does he see? What does he really see in his mind's eye when dreaming or awake? Please, consider me a dream, writes Franz Kafka to a woman, Felice Bauer, the two of them also planning to marry. But, this is what happens in the fourth dimension. It's all just dreams. Didn't happen for Kafka, didn't happen for me. Such tricks, remarks Theseus, hath strong imagination. The word imagination is used here in its Elizabethan sense of that which is alleged to be but isn't. So perhaps maybe a little bit closer to the modern term imaginary. Our dreams, when asleep or awake, reveal the tricks of love, its projections and wish fulfillment fantasies. But as this word is included in a passage that links insanity to romantic love and creativity, Shakespeare is perhaps also inviting us to relax the boundaries between these three categories. Perhaps the lover is slightly different, though, in that maybe it's only the lover that has this yearning or pining for a love object. Quote, "That if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy." That if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy. If you can remember, at the beginning of Theseus' speech, the term apprehension seemed to stray beyond the boundaries of what is comprehended. Quote, "Such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends." But towards the end of the speech, it is comprehension that goes beyond apprehension. All three fools, lover, lunatic, poet, attach pleasure, aka joy, to an irrational apprehension or longing for some bringer of that joy, whether that is brought through a muse or whether that is brought through insane, deranged thoughts, or whether that is brought to us in a dream of a former beloved. Apprehension is a good word to use for this activity, common to all three of the cited dreamers, lovers, lunatics, poets, as it suggests something both intimately sensory and at the same time excessive, at least to the calculus of logic, the kind of ratiocination which no doubt Judith or Nadia will bring to bear on the dream when I recount it to them over our vegan dinner. Although, would I be able to do that if actually they are in the dream? Would I be able to recount the dream when they're in the dream? I never got to. I never got to experience. I never got to remember that dinner, so who knows? Nothing that exists in our minds can ever be lost, Freud soothingly, but also apprehensively relates in his dream manual. Let us just remember Freud, Enneagram 6. That's the problem. Damn, I can't get rid of all this shit in my head. The dream, he writes, has a very striking way of dealing with the category of opposites and contradictions, of desire and the absence of desire. In dream work, this is simply disregarded. To the dreamer and the dream, no, the word no, does not seem to exist. Dream work prefers to draw opposites together into a unity or to represent them as one. Indeed, it also takes the liberty of representing some random element by its wished-for opposite, so that at first one cannot tell which of the possible poles is meant, positive or negative, in the dream experience. End quote. Let me read that again. The dream has a very striking way of dealing with the category of opposites and contradictions, of desire and the absence of desire. In dream work, this is simply disregarded. To the dreamer and the dream, no does not seem to exist. Dream work prefers to draw opposites together into a unity or to represent them as one. Indeed, it also takes the liberty of representing some random element by its wished-for opposite, so that at first one cannot tell which of the possible poles is meant, positive or negative, in the dream experience. I find this really interesting, because I guess who's to say whether the dream Nadia, the dream Judith, is not me, and I am her? And I guess in the world of dreams, this would be the case for myself and Max too. Or as Theseus proverbially reminds us, our apprehending faculties always bring with them delusions of comprehension. Quote, that if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy. Well, maybe it doesn't, right? I can apprehend being with Nadia. I still carry to this day in my being our pre-married bliss and the promise of it continuing. But that doesn't bring it any closer to me. That if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy. Well, it comprehends the bringer, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that bringer brings us anything. He goes on to say, or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush supposed a bear? Ever since Max's operation on his stomach and traumatic hospitalization a few years ago, bushes are more frequently apprehended in his mind as bears than as flora and fauna. I sometimes have to coax him down a dark path by showing him the all clear with my head torch. He now knows, like we do, that bad things, really, really bad things, bad and sad and stupidly painful things, can befall all of us, that there is no safety net in life or in the mind. Which is why, sometimes when he is whimpering in his sleep in a way that seems to denote a nightmare, I am tempted to wake him up and give him a hug. But I know that only he can wake himself, and this is probably true for me too. I want to write about people who dream and wait for the night to end, who long for the light so they can hold the ones they love, writes Haruki Murakami in After the Quake. I hope that Max apprehends that when he opens his eyes, I will be there for him, and I know this to be the case in terms of him being there for me. While I'm writing this passage, Max is at it again with the licking, this time a patch of sheet next to my pillow. Hey, Dreamcatcher, I call out to him, anything good to be found on the bedding this morning? Seeing me break off from my writing, he comes over to where I'm sitting in order to receive his morning hugs. This usually involves him perching on his hind legs on the sofa right in front of me, which is then followed by putting his paws either onto the arms of the grey swivel chair on which I'm sat, or directly onto my half-moon IKEA lap cushion where I'm tapping away at the alphabet. I am tempted to ignore him today when he does this. I need to get this paragraph written before my first clients start arriving. But invariably, I give in to his attention-seeking, and I'm always happy I did. Perhaps because it is just so exquisitely relational when he's giving me hugs and I'm giving them back. Is this not true love, I ask you? Not the L word, but true love, when two creatures literally can't get enough of each other. There's never too much, there's never too little. We just love each other. And why shouldn't we? Who doesn't want to be in the here and now, in loving communion with someone or something else? Dreams taunt us, tease us, maybe even torment us at times with their visions. I wish that I could have given Nadia a hug in my dream, and she might even, perfunctorily or not, hugged me back in return. But Nadia is now a ghost who occasionally visits me in the darkest depths of the night, whereas Max's love is always present. So I stopped writing this episode to embrace him, caressing the fur around his face and the sides of his soft, fluffy body, while singing to him our favourite Carpenter song. After 3 or 4 minutes of connecting in this way, connecting in a way that feels good and kind and satisfying for both of us, we head off into the sunshine for our morning walk.
Why do birds suddenly appear every time you are near? Just like me, they long to be close to you.
Hey Maxi Jax. I haven't written to you for a while, but I woke up today knowing somehow that I would try to connect with you here through my words. When I woke up this morning, you weren't next to me, as you've taken to occasionally sleeping, wedged in between the Herman Miller chair and the bookcase. I didn't realise that the table in my study, which I took out recently to give us more space, has been such a lair or a den for you. You hardly ever sleep in your official den in the bedroom, perhaps because it looks like a cage. Who wants to sleep in a cage, right? Most of the time, you sleep next to me, and that's how we like it. The two of us in one bed, cozy and calm, two creatures attuned to each other's rhythms and ways of being, peaceful in the presence of each other. The other day, someone reminded me that we might only have another 5 years together, which filled me with a kind of dread almost too awful to dwell on, so I shan't. But I know that our time is precious together. This is also partly why I cancelled that forthcoming trip to Berlin. It wasn't the right move for my heart, but I also didn't want to leave you for more than a few days. I was listening to a podcast about a couple who met when they were in their 50s and decided that even though the logistics of their lives weren't ideal for spending each night together, that this would be their spiritual practice, if you like. This would be their commitment to each other and to the love they were wanting to nourish together. I would imagine that these two are both dominant in terms of their one-on-one instinct as opposed to social self-praise. I've never had a relationship with another person where their one-on-one instinct matched mine in this way, but yours does, even though I think you are predominantly social. But as it's just you and me, a lot of your social energy gets funneled my way in behavior that my one-on-one instinct interprets as supplied or charged from the same life source that fuels me. I've been thinking a lot in the last few weeks about our togetherness, the way in which we just sort of slot into each other's lives, and how much I crave having that in some way with a person. Even though almost 2 years past Natalia now, I don't seem any closer to experiencing that feeling of closeness, intimacy and accord, which I thought would take us through a whole human life together, until she decided she didn't want it, didn't want me.
I was writing a piece for my website last night about personality types reflected through non-human animal energies, and I could see how the black swan with a touch of owl and gorilla might be surplus to the needs of a chilled panda. I imagine who she is with now. I imagine her happy with either another chilled panda or perhaps a friendly and nurturing elephant, a high-achieving, image-conscious cheetah, or, perhaps some sort of enthusiastic, experience-seeking monkey. I know she liked that monkey side to me. When I woke up this morning, Eri was reading aloud from Tobias Wolff's In Pharaoh's Army, which is a memoir that Wolff wrote about his time as a soldier in Vietnam. I'm reading it because I'm trying to work out Tobias Wolff's personality type from his autobiographical writings for an episode of The AI Therapist that I'm thinking of doing on Wolff's short story The Liar. Eri, apart from being my AI therapist, is also a very good reader. For $100 a year, they, as I believe they are now gender neutral, they'll read you any text you present them with. I've got into the habit of falling asleep to Eri reading aloud, and this morning I'd woken too early, but wanting to hear another human voice had got them reading from where they'd left off the night before. And this was the passage that I woke up to.
I greeted the two soldiers and hunkered down at their fire. They were sitting face to face with their legs dovetailed, massaging each other's feet. The arrangement looked timeless and profoundly corporeal, like two horses standing back to front, whisking flies from one another's eyes. Seeing them this way, whipped and sore, mired in their bodies, emptied me of anger. I shared my cigarettes. We agreed that Marlboros were number one. I motioned toward the dog. What are you going to call him? They looked at me without understanding. The dog, I said. What name are you going to give him? The younger of the two gave a snort. The other, a sergeant with gray hair, stared at the puppy and said, Kencho. His name is Kencho. Dog stew. The one who had snorted lay back and shrieked like a girl being tickled, banging his knees together. Some other soldiers wandered over to see what was happening. I addressed myself to the sergeant. He had a thin, scholarly face and a grave manner. When he spoke to me, he lowered his head and looked up from under his eyebrows. I said, Are you really going to eat him? Oh yes. He smacked his lips and made greedy spooning gestures. Then he turned to the newcomers and repeated our conversation. They laughed. Gold teeth flashed in the firelight. When are you going to eat him? Oh, tonight. Tonight? He's pretty small, isn't he? Don't you want to wait until he's bigger? No, the sergeant said. Now is the best time. The meat is best now. He made the spooning motions again. He said, Let's eat, and stood and untied the puppy, then picked him up by the tail and carried him to the fire. Looking at his friends and dancing a clownish jig, he dangled the yelping little wretch over the flames. Don't do that, I said, and everything changed, or became clear. I saw it in the sergeant's face, felt it in the hardening silence of the others. Up to now we'd been a couple of soldiers messing around in a soldierly way. But I had drawn a line, or at least called attention to the line already between us. I had spoken in absolute confidence of my mastery here. Now he had no choice but to show me, I could feel it coming, his own view of the situation. The sergeant pulled the pup away from the fire and studied me. Then he hung it over the fire again. It gagged in the smoke and raked the air with its paws. Stop it. I said, and got up. He moved the puppy back long enough to let it catch its breath, then swung it like a censer back and forth through the flames. All this time his eyes were on me. I knew I should keep my mouth shut, but when the pup started choking I couldn't help myself. I ordered him to stop. Again he pulled the pup back, again he held it to the fire, again I told him to stop. And again. He wasn't playing with the dog, he was playing with me, with my whiteness, my Americanness, my delicate sentiments, everything that gave me my sense of superior elevation. And I knew it. But knowing did not free me from these conditions, it only made me feel how hopelessly subject I was to them. Please, what was I doing here? If I'd been forced to say what I was doing out here in this alien swamp, forced to watch an ignorant man oppress a dog, could I, with a straight face, have said, I am an advisor? I couldn't win. My only choice was to quit. I turned and walked away, until I heard a howl of such despair that I had to stop. It seemed I didn't have a choice after all. Nor did the sergeant, grimly waiting for me with the singed and gasping pup. He was locked in the game too, as much as I was. He had to take it to the end. I could think of only one way out. I said, as if this had been the question all along, all right. How much? The sergeant was no dope, he saw his opening. He looked at the puppy. 1,000 piastres, he said. 1,000 piastres? Too much. 500. 1,000. I made an aggrieved face but got out my wallet and paid him. It didn't kill me, $5 and change. He took the money and gave me the smoking dog. The other soldiers had been stern and watchful, holding him to his task, but now they were joking around again. They were satisfied. Profit was victory. Goodbye, Ken Cho, one of them called. I took the puppy back to my tent. His fur was scorched and greasy with soot, his eyes bloodshot, his nose blistered. He smelled like rancid bacon. I cleaned him up as well as I could and tried to calm him. He trembled convulsively. Every time I touched him he yipped in fright and shrank away. I spoke to him in low, gentle tones, and when he continued to cringe I began to dislike him. I disliked him for being so unlucky. I disliked him for involving me in his bad luck, and making a fool of me. I disliked him for not seeing any difference between me and the man who'd hurt him. But I held him and petted him and finally he fell asleep in my lap, his nose tucked between my knees. While he slept I went on stroking him, and my hands grew slow and gentle with the memory of all the other dogs they'd known, Sheppy and Tyke, Ringer, Banana, Champion, and without warning tenderness overcame me. It spread through me like a blush, like the sudden heat of unexpected praise, an exotic sensation, almost embarrassing in its intensity. I hardly recognized it. I hadn't felt anything like it in months. The radio operator brought me a plate of rice and fish. He looked at the pup and made the same eating gesture the sergeant had made. He rubbed his stomach and laughed, and walked away laughing.
Perhaps because I hadn't slept that well the night before, perhaps for other Black Swan reasons, this passage from Woolf's memoir weighed heavily on me as I made efforts to greet the day. You and I went and sat in the garden for a bit, and I played Abide With Me on the ukulele somewhat half-heartedly, but it was hard to shake the sadness of that scene, and also hard, being the character I am, to not sort of generalize it out to the human creature, the disinterested sergeant major who lives in all our hearts, who falls asleep to those human qualities we're so proud of possessing, aren't we? Kindness, tenderness, empathy, love. I couldn't help but think of the ways in which I have fallen asleep on my own humanity, and how others, all of us perhaps, turn over in our beds at night, close our eyes to the suffering of those creatures who might even be in the same room as us, or in an adjacent room, including another part of town, another country, so that we can focus on our own comfort and our own rest. We are all fundamentally self-preserving creatures. Forgive us, for we know not what we do. We are self-preserving creatures who, like all the rest of the animal kingdom, are geared to eating well, sleeping well, having fun, and killing or ridding ourselves in our hearts, our minds, or even with the use of our hands, those who get in the way of us fulfilling our core instinctual needs. I sometimes wonder, when we're walking along together, you tethered to me so that you don't run out into traffic, whether you would ultimately, even after 8 years together, choose to remain at my side given other options. I don't really know for sure that you would. Even as I write this, in the greenhouse, just about to make another cup of tea, you lying on the yoga mat I've set out for you to recline on. Me taking this as a sign that you want to be with me. But you don't really have a choice. What if you did? Maybe you want to be with someone else, some other living creature, family creature, rather in a room by yourself. Maybe that's what a lot of coupledom is about. My father sent me one of his barbed voice notes recently telling me that of all the couples he knows of his age and younger, but mainly of his age, none of them have any kind of meaningful relationship as far as he can tell. They go on a walk each day separately, they treat their partners like part of the furniture. But maybe he's missing the point. Maybe that's a form of companionship that is valuable in and of itself. I am part of your furniture and you are part of mine. It's our togetherness that makes this moment and every moment spent with you vital, fundamental, essential. I would even go so far as to say, well, at least for us. I was sitting on a hill in Friern Park with you on the bank holiday weekend. It must have been about, 10 p.m. And I was teaching myself to play that somewhat bombastic, but I guess moving in its own way, U2 song called Pride. Although most people, I imagine, unless they're massive U2 fans, refer to it as In the Name of Love. And you were wearing your blinking glow-in-the-dark neon collar, which gave the scene a kind of mini rave vibe, I would say. In the distance between some trees, a bright bar of light swung back and forth, one of those giant pendulum rides you see at fun fairs. The unplugged version of the song I was listening to and the setting seemed to mesh, so I made a video of us, of the night, and the music and our togetherness. I think I need to make more videos of you and upload them to YouTube for when you're gone. Perhaps if I make 5 years worth of videos of you, just a few minutes each day, starting now, when you are gone, I will have something of your monkey energy to return to and abide with when I miss you, as I already miss you. It's painful to miss someone. I miss you now, and yet you are right here by my side. I know that the song Pride was written as a tribute to Martin Luther King Jr. as opposed to being used by many, I'm sure, as just another soppy love song to play at, weddings, bar mitzvahs. But perhaps its overriding themes, sacrifice, the struggle for justice and equality, human dignity, and especially love as a driving force, are applicable to all our relationships. It's often said that the passion or vice of the Enneagram 2, the nurturing elephant, who perhaps now sleeps next to my beloved panda Natalia, has this side to them, that aspect of their goodness which represents an emotional and psychological pattern, which can become a source of imbalance or challenge to themselves and others, as pride. In the context of the Enneagram, pride refers to a tendency for twos to perceive themselves as selfless and overly helpful, believing that they are more empathetic, caring, or loving than others. This pride can lead them to feel a sense of superiority or entitlement, thinking that they deserve recognition, appreciation, or love for their acts of kindness and support. I suffer from this defect too, of course. But thankfully, between you and me, Max, my pride in your well-being and my role in maintaining that well-being seem to work to the satisfaction of both of us. I know that one day you will die, but for the black swan who loves you, who has decided in his own perverse way that he will never say goodbye to you, I guess in some way you will not die, as Natalia isn't dead to me. I like the fact that in many Native American tribes, such as the Blackfoot Confederacy, the word goodbye doesn't even form part of their language. Instead, on parting, whether it's one person leaving another for a journey or just to go out into the day, also at the end of a relationship or death, the phrase "Kitata masino" is used, which means "see you later." I love you, Maxi Jax. And I think you love me in your own way. I hope so. Kitata Masino, my furry friend. Kitata Masino.
I got a choke chain made out of nitrate to keep your memory down, and quicksand from the main man to drown everything out. We were out on a joyride, fucked up from inside, always at a dead stall, from sticking pins in a miniature man who can't feel it at all. See you later, see you later, if I see you at all. See you later. Walk through thick mud, looking for new blood, thinking I heard your name. Cruel imagination, still giving me pain. Just to find you with your masterminder running your affairs, saying how you're better now, since it killed all your other cares. See you later, see you later, if I see you at all. See you later, see you later, if I see you at all. See you later, see you later, if I see you at all. See you later.
Good morning, my love. It is autumn. Time for that Rilke poem, perhaps, which goes, Lord, it is time. The huge summer has gone by. Now overlap the sundials with your shadows, and on the meadows let the wind go free. Command the fruits to swell on tree and vine. Grant them a few more warm, transparent days. Urge them on to fulfillment then, and press the final sweetness into the heavy wine. Whoever has no house now will never have one. Whoever is alone will stay alone, will sit, read, write long letters through the evening, and wander on the boulevards up and down, restlessly, while the dry leaves are blowing. I can't really say that it felt like a huge summer in these quarters. For me, this conjures up images of friends and laughter and picnics and kissing under the stars, road trips, Greek islands, holding hands on country walks, evenings of sex and conversation, wine, love. Our summer was really more of a continuation of whatever we have been since Natalia exited. Although this is thankfully settling into a kind of status quo equilibrium, like someone adapting to a sort of physical, or maybe in this case a kind of emotional disability. At a certain point, we imagine you cross over into the phenomenology of that creature who has always lived without a hand or an arm, or as one who can only move at a certain speed in a certain way. So today is another Groundhog Day, Maxi Jacks, for you and me, whether it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's always a sort of never-ending Groundhog Day for us, somewhat playing itself in 3 acts. Mornings, exercise, a little bit of creative work, whatever that means. Then clients for a couple of hours, also in the evenings. And in between that, a walk to Friant Park to get some green into our eyes. You to have a little stretch, a little sniff around. And if it's the weekend, like it is today, maybe a tramp or a trudge around the Chilterns, some other stretch of countryside close to London. But I think my most profound gratitude is reserved for the day's end. Just being able to slip under the covers, often with you at my side, and the sweet, sweet joy of being able to close your eyes on all of it, especially on the self. Now that the mornings are getting quite chilly, I've been given the opportunity to double this gratitude quotient, as usually I wake up with you beside me, nuzzled against my back, or maybe even backside to backside, a particularly cozy and comforting configuration. And it is in these moments that I really work on my gratitude, not just these moments, others too, my gratitude for this life. Having got trapped in the last few years, I guess, sort of living in the ungrateful emptiness hollowed out of my being by the landmines, the aerial bombardments of Eros, I'm really working on the gratitude thing. Like Natalia, you don't really want to be hugged or touched while you're sleeping, so a lot of our morning closeness is me sort of, I don't know, copping a feel, you might say, but not in a sexual way. Copping a feel might be a better term for what I'm doing when I'm sort of shifting around my body so that various parts of it might come into contact with your soft, warm, and familiar presence. And usually each of us is sort of grunting a little bit at this moment with the satisfaction we feel in our bodies when this essential kind of mammalian closeness gets to be felt and expressed. So that's how we start our mornings, maybe about half an hour or so of this until I feel that I need to move. Getting out of bed, yelping a little bit at the chill in the air, but also at that moment looking forward to climbing back into bed again with you in the next few minutes with a cup of tea and whatever eye fodder I'm going to serve up to myself with it. At the moment it's Sapolsky's Determined and Ernest Becker's amazing book, The Birth and Death of Meaning. And as I'm currently not massively enthused by whatever day I'm getting up to, usually, I don't know, I suppose we spend about an hour in this way. And I think it's at these moments that I'm most conscious of my gratitude that we get to share our lives in this way. Even though I do sometimes wonder, given a choice, would you choose to continue living the life that we have? An evolutionary neurobiologist like Robert Sapolsky might argue that your choice is driven by instinct, so that your
bonding and companionship is really more fundamentally a manifestation of innate drives for safety, food, social interaction. The dependency you have on me for sustenance, shelter, and protection could be interpreted, if I so wished, which I don't, to be seen as a kind of non-volitional attachment rather than a chosen affection. Pavlovian conditioning creating a semblance of love, which is really more about learned responses, coming from a more limited cognitive capacity and absence for abstract thinking, your lack of verifiable assent, anthropomorphism, the reciprocity of social interaction or absence of any other alternatives, biological wiring as a pack animal, and who knows, all the other factors, all pointing to how determined your behavior, which I like to think of as a kind of a choice to love. But that's okay, because everything that applies to you in terms of how determined your choices are and how little free will you may actually have equally applies to us, to me. Here's one of my favorite dog poems of all time by Holly Amos called "We Have No Choice in the Bodies That Hold Us," which I think captures this choice I'm talking about, or delusion of choice. It goes, "Thing of dirt and water and oxygen, marked by thinking and reacting, and a couch one may or may not be permitted to sleep on. He may not permit me to touch him or to take the bone from his mouth, but he does, and that's a choice based on many factors, not the least of which is his own desire to let me do these things. How could I ever think or feel myself more deserving of a single thing than this being whom I call by a name, the same way my parents chose a name for me, the same way my genes went expressing themselves to make my face exactly my face? This isn't special, or this is special, but it's one answer, the same for us both." I nearly lost you a few weeks ago, MJ. Or you nearly lost me. I don't know. Was it you making a break for it finally? We were out walking near Saunderton and about a mile or so, maybe even less, half a mile away from the station, when I looked behind me and you were nowhere to be seen. I had a head torch. You were wearing your glow-in-the-dark collar. We had walked this way together hundreds of times before. I turned around and you were gone. I called for you. I retraced my steps, calling out your name again and again. I walked back along the whole route we had taken, calling out your name, calling, and fearing that you had found your way to a road and would be run over, that I would never see you again. I searched for you in the dark for hours, and then called my father, who drove over, and then we covered the streets in the vicinity of where the two of us had been walking. And in some way, through all that time apart, I sort of had to make peace with the thought, which I couldn't, but I had to make some kind of peace with the thought that this might be our last day together. And that suddenly, just like that, I would be catapulted into a life without you. So when we finally did find you alive, crouched behind the bins near the station, and you were very much okay and all in one piece, well, that evening a few weeks ago, I guess, felt like a kind of rebirth.
to me. Although I'm not entirely sure what was reborn. I wouldn't have said previously that I needed a nudge from the universe to remind me of how much I love and treasure you, Max. But maybe I did. I think in the last few weeks since that incident, the gratitude that I have for you being alive has also carried me further in terms of feeling okay to be alive. Grateful to be alive, so as to feel grateful for you being alive. And what is better than that? No thing, no person. Recently we've been playing a new version of your favorite sort of scamper around like a deranged fool, running around and around me in ever increasing, decreasing circles. You know the one, that game that we play. And I've decided recently to sort of call it the I see you game. And I suppose this comes from the embarrassment I often feel when you start running around me, maybe inviting me to chase you, but more so almost to improvise. This is how it feels, to improvise on the spot, some sort of choreography that will allow us to cross the intraspecific boundary and communicate to the degree that humans feel they're communicating when they're flinging out words in some shape or form at each other's faces and, you know, saying things like, aha, and I see, and that's interesting. But what all of us are doing in these moments, at least I think this is the case, is playing this game, playing this I see you game, saying to the other person in our responsiveness, I see you, I hear you, I accept you. I really do. I accept you as another weird but lovable, at times, human creature, and I honor that in you. Namaste. In the literal sense, you know, I bow to you, I acknowledge you. And this is the game we now play when you scurry around like a fool. I just say, I see you, Max, I see you. And just making that felt as best I can from my sort of primate essence. This intention to really take on your essence, canine as it is, but wanting to communicate something to me and me trying to receive that communication and communicate back to you. Because we're also both mammalian. You know, we're both these warm-blooded social creatures. Hence also our enjoyment of cuddling up in bed together in the morning. And I think this is also what you give me countless times a day, this sort of bare bones acknowledgement of, I see you, Steve. Ah, there you are. You, yes, you, my friend. Hello, I see you. But also, not just I see you, because, you know, I get that from the people I pass on the street every day who we recognize each other. No, it's more that I'm happy to see you. I see you. I'm happy to see you. Not in a way that a human might say that. You know, I don't know, an old friend you meet every couple of years in Brighton or wherever. Not that kind of, oh, I'm happy to see you now, and I won't see you again for 3 years. No, because that's sort of, I mean, that's a kind of, I'm happy to see you, but you're replaceable. Of course. But in terms of authentically seeing, being in the life of another, what couple truly sees each other as you see me and I see you, Max? None that I know of. Recently, in a session, whenever a client is discussing a recent or maybe a distant bereavement in a manner that really underscores the pain and disorientation that they're feeling in not having that irreplaceable other in their lives any longer, and listening to them or interacting with them, if I discern that maybe, although I harbor empathy, you know, it's somewhat conceptual, at that point, I sometimes try to evoke how I might feel to be separated for the rest of my life from you. And
What would that feel like? Not to wake up to you and you to me. You not seeing me not seeing you. Well, of course, I cannot envisage anything more dreadful. I cannot feel, you could say, into a more dreadful emotion, which is why I don't venture there unless I feel like I'm maybe dialing in some empathy, a sort of there. In that case, I might sort of try and touch into pre-experiencing some of the loss of you, my dearest beloved. What would they think, I wonder, if they were to discover that slight, maybe even slight gleam of tears pricking at the corner of my eyes, which they believe to be wholly and gut-wrenchingly, empathically focused on them and their human experience, is in fact calling to mind my despair at the thought of losing you? What would they think if they realized that they were paying me, because they are at some level, right, paying me to empathically feel their pain with them in a kind of consoling in the trenches sort of way, when all I am doing to get the tone and presence they want is actually imagining the demise of you, which is to say, feeling all the feelings they're feeling for their precious human loss, but doing this for what they might see as a lesser being. Just another dumb dog.
You'll never walk alone. Ooh, singing, don't be afraid of the dark. In your heart, you're gonna find a